to Arizona Talks, and we've got a panel today, a very esteemed panel that you'll meet shortly. I'm John Book from Fox 10, and we're going to talk today about the First Amendment and the state of journalism in this country right now. And I appreciate Carlos having us out today, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. This should be very interesting because we've got some varying opinions up here. But Valeria Aponte is a political reporter for Telemundo, Arizona, news at 4 o'clock. She's a multi-Emmy Award winner, and it is great to have you on the program. Could you just give us a brief thumbnail of how you ended up in Arizona and a bit of your background?
I'll try to do it as brief as possible. It's a long story. But yes, thank you so much for having me here. I'm from Jabucoa, Puerto Rico, a small town an hour away from San Juan. Not many people go there. But it's a great town. If you're ever there, just let me know. And from there, I went to Syracuse University. That's where I fell in love with journalism, where they teach a lot about the importance of freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And from there, and from my experiences in my childhood and with my family, and also the experiences in my career, starting off in Texas in the Rio Grande Valley, the southernmost part of Texas. It's not even the south part of Texas. And in DC, you get so many experiences, you meet so many people that you value every time even more, if it's possible, the importance of freedom of speech, the importance of freedom of the press, and the essential role that it plays in our democracy. So I'm very excited to be a part of this and for Carlos to inviting me to talk about this issue with you guys.
It's great to see you. And Clint Bolick is the Associate Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court, appointed by Governor Ducey. I think you were his first appointment.
Yes.
And before that, with the Goldwater Institute, Vice President of Litigation, and you co-founded the Institute for Justice. Great to see you, Clint.
Oh, it's great to see you too. And my wife went to Syracuse. Gee, isn't it interesting that so many people end up in the word everywhere? Yes. And I also have the honor of teaching constitutional law both at the University of Arizona on occasion and ASU Law School.
This is a great starting off point, I think, for us to just, and we'll go around the horn. And by the way, just for those of you who may not know, I've been here, I'm a graduate of Arizona State University. Before it was the Cronkite School, I've been the beneficiary of degree inflation because the degree from ASU now is really considered top-notch. But I've been here in the Valley since 1993. I was first a weekend reporter, weekday reporter, weekend anchor, and then became the weeknight anchor in 1994. So I've been here, I don't know how many years that is, 20-some years, 27 years. Let's talk about the state of journalism right now. Before we get into kind of more esoteric questions about the First Amendment, let me start, if I can. Clint, I'll start with you. Your thoughts about whether people are being well served by the journalism they are getting present day?
I would say, unfortunately, emphatically not. I am a news junkie with apologies, primarily a print news junkie, and I find that it's very, very difficult to get a straight news story, the sort of thing that you were taught at ASU, you were taught at Syracuse. And, we just saw the resignation of Barry Weiss from the New York Times with some really scathing accusations of what's going on in the newsroom there, basically saying that instead of ferreting out the facts and letting people decide for themselves, there's received wisdom and it is being presented as truth with a capital T. So I go on sites like Real Clear Politics now where they balance it, one liberal article and one conservative. I'd love to have a more efficient way of just reading a straight news story and being able to trust it. This is also made worse by the fact that many people have put themselves into silos and they don't read news that doesn't fit their own perspective. And so I think this is a vicious cycle now where it's dividing us because people don't have a common frame of reference for their news anymore.
That is a beautiful summation. Very nicely done. I think you hit the nail on the head. Valeria, what is your opinion about whether the public is being well served in this current climate?
I agree with a lot of what you mentioned, and it's a lot of the obstacles that we are facing, I am truly proud and honored to work for a station that we focus on the facts. We do give our community a voice. That is the most important thing. We listen to the issues that our community is dealing with. We go to the officials to hold them accountable, to get help. But we are dealing with a lot of false information from social media or also websites who are spreading misinformation. And then we are dealing with people who want to believe those websites versus the truth, versus those reliable sources. And that is something, sadly, we deal with a lot with this pandemic. And so not only do we have to inform our community with the facts, with the truth, give them a voice, but we also have to show them why maybe that outlet you're following is not the truth. However, we are dealing with a lot of people that if it's not what they want to believe, or this is not what they believe, they're not going to believe us. And it's very stressful. It's very stressful. And mentioning this pandemic, we're constantly with the Arizona Department of Health, with the governor's office, with different doctors. And there are some people who sometimes even question me and question what we're reporting on my social media, saying that's not true. This is a fake virus. This is a fake pandemic. Only a few people are affected. And I'm like, no, these are doctors. These are the ones seeing this every day. So it is very disappointing, and it's a challenge I'm sure that you felt too, John.
Yeah, and I was going to go a little further than Clint, because the business that I got into of journalism back in 1984, 83, 84, first in radio, a lot of this is frankly unrecognizable to me. I feel like really kind of a dinosaur and old school about providing balance. We all have opinions about life. Opinions are part of our DNA, how we feel about the world. And those things are true of everyone that's watching, everyone who's here today. The question is, can the journalist be fair? Can the journalist, and this gets into the business you do, which is trying to be a fair arbiter of the facts. And I feel that there's a lot of agendas going on in newsrooms today. I don't know where this started. I suspect it started in academia, where we're producing journalists who are more activists than fact finders. Our job, I don't believe, is to try to build a narrative or even sway public opinion. Our job is to objectively report what's going on and let all of you decide what is the best course of action. We should not be in the advocacy business, but I feel more and more we become part of the advocacy business. And that makes me exceedingly uncomfortable. And even, I'll be very honest, in a Fox newsroom, you would say, well, these are a bunch of righties in that newsroom. Not true. I can pretty much tell you with assurance that probably 80% of our staff leans left. So to provide some ballast, some counterweight to that, there are people in that newsroom, I am among them, who are trying to always try to pull us back a little bit to equilibrium. And this is not a fun position to be in. It may not even be a position that I'm comfortable being in personally, but I feel like we have to do it. Because that's what the public, I feel, demands of us. I hope they do. The one thing I would pivot with Clint on is the state of journalism. There is one dynamic that has changed from when I came in. There are so many sources of information now that maybe we've never been able to find the truth more than we can now. We used to have journalists masquerading around as if they had no opinion, but they did, as we found out. Even Walter Cronkite came out during the Vietnam War and said, we need to end this. In so many words, he said, I can't support this anymore. And that's a guy who was held to the highest level of acclaim for being kind of a level, measured guy. But even he had opinions that crossed over into his professional life. Are we in a unique opportunity right now, even with this issue, to find the truth?
Well, I think in a certain sense we are, given the multiplicity of outlets. Basically, anyone can be a journalist today, and everyone is.
Is that a good thing?
But ultimately, probably not. You know, if you go on Facebook, people believe It's some of the things that are posted are just literally incredible. And people believe them because they support their own personal narrative. And so I think with this multiplicity of outlets comes far greater personal responsibility for sifting through the news and holding it to a standard. My own personal standard is I won't post something that I haven't verified or is not from a really trustworthy source, which they're evaporating quickly. But I think from a speaker standpoint, we've never been in a better position. We don't have media monopolies anymore. If you don't like your newspaper, you can get news from so many outlets. It's amazing. But from the perspective of getting the truth, it's a lot harder now than it's ever been.
And even the set of facts, you can have, we used to say, well, the facts are the facts and we may interpret them differently. We can't even agree on the facts anymore.
Right.
And COVID is a prime example. And maybe this is born out of people being able to seek other opinions. I think of the two doctors in California, the two emergency room doctors who were censored off of Facebook for sounding the alarm and saying, we are not seeing what we're hearing here. We're hearing crisis, and I'm just telling you what we're seeing in our emergency room. And people found this information, they were hungry for it, and then they got banned off of Facebook.
Well, for me, there's so much technology, there's so many outlets available for us not to be able to find the truth. We deal with a lot of like what's true or not based on what people post sometimes on social media. Sometimes there are some sources that give us incorrect information. I'm sure that's happened to you, like people in top positions.
Sure.
But we do have the ability to be informed human beings, and I struggle with that on a weekly basis when I have people sending me websites from a website I've never heard in my life. Or people saying, oh, but they're gossiping about this. This happens a lot with my parents. They're smart people, but they hear a lot of cheesing. and I'm like, well, where did you get that from? And then they send this, and I'm like, well, we haven't found out about this. And a lot of, I think doctors now are feeling, well, we've dealt for almost 4 or 5 years where the press is constantly being questioned. But going back to what you mentioned, which is something that is true, but people get confused. A lot of people say that they can become a journalist easily, but there's a difference between being a journalist and a reporter. Very different, and a lot of people mix those two names. Anybody can be a reporter, absolutely anybody. However, a journalist, a person that connects with the community, does their due diligence, does their investigation, does their checks and balances, rewrites their script, makes sure that everything right, that's what a journalist is. You can't graduate from college and say you're a journalist. You have to do your work. And I think a lot of people are also confused. And when it comes to reporting the facts, that's your job. It's not about me giving my opinion. And it's hard. As a Latina, as a woman, sometimes it's hard not to express my opinion. But my job is not to tell people what they have to think. My job, these are the facts. This is what one side's saying. This is what the other side's saying. This is how our community is feeling. It's up to them to see the light, and if they want to see it, then great, I did my job, but if not, we'll keep informing them.
Let me ask you, I'm curious, and I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute.
It's okay.
Take the immigration issue. Mm-hmm. Just because of your background, your time at the border, you're Latina, mm-hmm. Do you feel any pressure to present that issue a certain way? And if you don't on Telemundo, you're going to face tremendous backlash.
Honestly, I'm truly blessed. Again, I'm not saying this because I'm sure my boss will see it, but I'm truly blessed to work at a station where we focus so much on how our community is feeling. We listen to them. And when we go to politicians, we go with their questions. I don't like sensationalism, or how they say in Spanish, amarillista. I am always focused on our community. Going to that, a lot of what's happening with immigration, I don't have to give my opinion, because you already have the people, you already have the president, you already have both sides. They can come up with their own opinion. I don't have to sensationalize it, because the reality is sometimes they already sensationalize it for themselves, and if it's the truth or if it's an opinion, I'm putting it there. But is it hard to see people being separated from their families? Of course. Is it hard for them see them crying and devastated to go back to a country where it's full of violence, which is a fact. This is not us making it up. The violence in the Central American countries is horrendous. It's been horrendous for decades. A lot of them, I mean, hearing that I cross the border because if I don't, my son's gonna join a gang, and we're not talking about US gangs. Over there, that's a whole nother story. It is hard, but it's not my job to give my opinion. I am a messenger between the people and the audience. It's their story, it's not about me. And I have that very clear. But there have been times where, it's hard, but it's not my job to give my opinion.
Yeah, and I think in our case, just the Fox logo, the impression, and I get stuff on social media all the time, they'll say, well, they're telling you what to say. They have never, ever at Fox, ever told us what to say, how to say it, what to cover, what not to cover. This is something that comes up constantly. They think that we're getting our marching orders from New York. They want nothing to do with trying to figure out what we should be covering in Phoenix, Arizona. They're leaving that to us and our news management to make those decisions. And they trust the people they put into place to do that. But do people come to us when they see that logo with an expectation? I suspect a lot of them do. So, again, we're journalists, but we're also part of a bigger business model. So everybody finds their audience, right? And this is part of survival in this arena we're in right now. That's a part that I don't think about a lot. I bet you don't think about it either. But I know our news managers think about it a lot. Because that keeps the lights on. That keeps us doing what we're doing. That keeps the money flowing. So there are pressures that are probably above us that we're on the ground maybe not even aware of. That I don't want to say guide coverage, but everybody kind of finds their niche and their audience. And I think the New York Times, Clint, you brought up the New York Times, and this was an astonishing development. And I think it kind of started with the Senator Cotton op-ed about bringing in federal troops to quell the violence after the George Floyd protests and riots and violence that ensued.
And people losing their jobs over that.
So that, again, the New York Times, there's an expectation there now with them of what they're going to give their readers. And it's been very successful. Their readership's never been larger.
No, I think that's absolutely right, and it goes back to what I was saying about people putting themselves in silos. I subscribed since I was a teen to the New York Times, and I gave up that subscription a few weeks ago after that incident just because I felt, I can't trust this publication anymore.
Was that the Senator Cotton op-ed?
Yes.
That they
and the aftermath from that. And when Barry Weiss talked about it, that's totally fine in my opinion. Well, of course, these are private entities and they can operate however they wish. But it's certainly fine for an editorial room, but when it spills over into the newsroom, that's when people start losing confidence. You mentioned Walter Cronkite before. When he was alive, if you did a poll of the 10 most trusted people in the country, I'm sure he would have been in the top 10 and possibly the top 1. If there was such a poll, I'm not even sure who would populate that top 10 right now, but I doubt that a journalist would make that list. That to me is incredibly sad.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because even Cronkite, at one point with the Vietnam War, felt compelled to come out and denounce it and say, I can no longer support this. We should not be doing this. Conversely, on a local level, we talk about truth and fact-finding, but is there a point with the journalist where you feel compelled to take a position because you feel so strongly that it is correct that you need to state it?
Well, I haven't gotten to that point yet. I'm a political reporter, so I have to be very neutral. It's my job, and I think I do a good job in it. I think the community thinks so too, and I also work on it. But there are some topics, so the only time so far in my, I want to say 7-year career where it was very hard for me not to take a point was when the whole situation happened with Hurricane Maria. It's not a local thing, but as a Puerto Rican, I would have to say it was devastating. The hurricane entered through my hometown. So for me, those, I want to say 48 hours, 72 hours, that I couldn't get a hold of my parents was probably the worst nightmare I've had in my 29 years of life. And hearing false reports about what was going on, or hearing how the government wasn't taking the action, and I am not going to blame the federal government. I think both the local government and the federal government, that is not an opinion, that is a fact, failed the Puerto Rican people. So I think that's the only time that on air, I really wanted to say something. I really wanted to speak up so people realized what was happening.
Did you go down there?
I went down there a month and a half after. It was very, very hard. The first thing I wanted to do was get on a plane and be there. There weren't that many flights to be there, and also the situation was so bad that both of my parents said, we want you to stay there because that's another head we have to feed. That's another water that we're wasting. That's another person we have to protect because the situation was horrible. But I did have to go a month and a half afterwards because my grandmother got extremely sick. She is one of the persons counted as people that lost their lives a year after Maria. When I got there, it looked like a hurricane had just happened. And that was a month and a half after the hurricane. My hometown was unrecognizable, and it was very hard. It was very hard when I went to see my grandfather and he showed me the FEMA box, and it was bars of chocolates and goldfish and bottle of water. Thankfully, he has someone to take care of him, but imagine the people that were getting that. Or the people that had this blue cape, but it's always raining there. It's not Arizona. It's like monsoons all the time, but that's not what they're called. So don't say that I said a monsoon happened in Puerto Rico. So it was very devastating, and it was very disappointing, like I said.
Did you have to report from there?
No, I offered myself. I actually even told my boss I voluntarily go there, but I didn't because I'm not sure if it's the same in Fox. They have a team. So if, for example, the Puerto Rico team needs help, they will probably send correspondents from the East Coast. Versus if, for example, the California or Nevada
So
team, they were handling it, but I did offer. But it was tough. It was tough. It was very, I think it's the only time in my career where it was very hard the few times I reported it to stay neutral. It was very hard not to express myself in social media because it was the devastation. It's like nothing I've ever seen before in my life.
This is so interesting because I think our disciplines in some way really cross. Because you have to sit in judgment, for lack of a better word, of an issue that comes before the High Court in Arizona, and suspend your own prejudice, bias, and try to fairly hear both sides of an issue. And you're ruling on law, so if it falls in the parameter, whether you agree with it personally or not, is immaterial.
You're absolutely right, and I know a number of people had questions about whether I would be able to do that, having been a fierce advocate.
You got that many, you got appointed.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And as a lawyer, one of the first things you have to do, and your success depends upon your ability to do this, is to neutrally assess your own case and to make the determination as to whether you've got a case that can succeed or not. And then, after you decide you have a shot, then you go into advocacy mode. And I like to say that as a judge, what I do is that first part and no longer the second part. So I
actually turn that off.
Sure. And then once I reach a decision, then I can go back into advocacy mode again, as a dissenter writing in the majority or whatever. But the other thing we are very lucky that you don't have is that we have briefs from both sides arguing the different points of view. And and the different legal arguments, and they are typically pretty balanced in terms of their quality. Everyone has the same number of pages, the same minutes of oral arguments.
It's very thorough.
And it's usually very, very thorough. Just imagine if you had that kind of situation. It would make your job a lot easier.
We're creating our own race.
Exactly.
On both sides. I'm going to share a quick story. This is you talk about trying to kind of park your personal feelings about Puerto Rico and the hurricane. I'm sorry about your grandmother, by the way. I moderated the debate on education between Fred Duvall and Doug Ducey back when they were running. I thought it was a really great debate because we took the entire hour and a half and focused on education purely. We did not venture into any other issues. Now, I will tell you, you're wearing these hats. Now, I'm moderating this, and it's me, and it's Fred, and it's Doug Ducey on my right. And I was very aware through this entire exercise that as a Fox anchor, the assumption was going to be that I am going to tank it for Doug Ducey. I was so aware of this and so worried about it that I think looking back on it, I probably went a little too far toward Fred Duvall, who I like very, he's a great guy. And he and Ducey, by the way, have become, simpatico on a lot of issues, and education is one of them. But I felt this pressure because I'm on Fox. People have an expectation. Well, he's going to tank it for this guy. So I was hell-bent on making sure nobody could charge that. And as a result, I think I actually tipped over maybe too far the other way in a fair assessment of what I did that night. But these are the kinds of gymnastics that you're playing. I think if you're good at what you do, you should be playing them.
John, you put your finger on something that I can really identify with. And Justice Gorsuch, during his confirmation battles or hearings, said, if you're a judge and you agree with all of your decisions, you're probably not a very good judge. And I find that I'm never happier than when I have reached a decision that's contrary to my own policy views, because I feel like I've done what my oath of office requires me to do, which is to balance things fairly and objectively.
May I venture into another area, because I'm dying to ask you this question. Justice Roberts, he is an enigma. He was a Bush appointee. Everybody expected he'd be very conservative. He has become the swing vote. Do you believe that he is doing this to restore public confidence in the high court, even in issues where, and I think of Obamacare as a prime example, he had to contort his legal mind a little bit to get to that decision that this was a tax, therefore, the decisions. Does he feel this pressure that I just described in a tiny little area on the governor debate? Does he feel the same pressure to try to uphold the public's confidence in the high court that he is going to play both sides?
Well, I always fear my own psychoanalytical abilities, so I want to be a bit circumspect about this. But I think that he does. I think that's the only thing that ties all of his decisions together. In the Obamacare case, I think there were probably 1 million predictions on how that case was going to turn out, and not a single one of them was correct, because Chief Justice Roberts was just completely surprising in where he went. More recently, the abortion decision. Just a few years ago, Chief Justice Roberts wrote a scathing dissent in a case striking down an almost identical law. This time around, he voted the other way, saying, well, the court has already ruled and I'm going to hold fast to that. And there are other decisions as well. He's still, I think, a very conservative justice, but he has a sense, and I agree with this emphatically, that our court system has to be perceived as a non-political branch.
That's what I was getting at. Thank you.
And I am not sure I would do some of the things that he has done, but I think that that is the drum to which he marches. And
For the sake of the institution.
Exactly.
Wow,
And
that is interesting.
I want to add to that because you bring Chief Justice Roberts, which is true, he is an enigma, and it's very interesting, his decisions going lately to the DACA one, where a lot of people thought it was going to go against the Dreamers. I mean, they were certain this is not going to go on their favor. Obviously, the last thing you lose is hope, but then when you see the decision, it's like, wait a minute, am I reading this right? And it's like, he basically made a decision based on what this lawsuit was about. Did the Trump administration make this decision because of arbitrary reasons? And I forgot the last word in English, caprichosa, sorry.
That's pretty close to the English.
Yes.
Capricious.
Thank you. My parents would be so disappointed if I butchered that. But he based his decision on what the lawsuits were about. And that's what you have to do, and I'm pretty sure you get this on a daily basis because a lot of people think that justices already have their minds made up before you make a decision. They think, okay, if they were appointed by a Republican, you're going to side with the government, or if you were appointed by the Democrats, you're definitely not going to side with what's going on now. And I even get those questions on air sometimes. I one time got asked, so what do the justices from President Trump say? And I'm like, well, the job of a judge is to interpret the law, not take political sides. But there's people that think that way, and you have to educate them that what each person's role is. But I'm sure you guys face a lot of what we have to deal with, that we're not giving our opinion, we're just stating facts. But they assume maybe because it's Fox or it's NBC, which supposedly they're polar opposites, they already pinpoint you as, okay, you're a liberal if you work for NBC, but you're conservative if you work for Fox. Even though, like you mentioned, every station is different. Maybe in a national way, you are seen as conservative, but that doesn't mean the local station's the same.
No, I on that score, I think when we talk about presidential debates right now, and I wanted to ask President Trump this on the border, I never got to it because it's a very limited time frame when you're interviewing the president. But one of the questions I did want to ask him was, who would be a moderator who you would be comfortable with? I think the list is very, very short on both sides. I think we're down to about 3 or 4 people. I'm not kidding. Unless we want to do this in a completely different way. Because all the journalists have revealed their cards. There's just so much airtime now that eventually the opinion is going to come out. The opinion will start to percolate.
Can I nominate the two of you?
I'd love to do it. Well, again,
yes, please. I don't mind that.
Yes, I think again, this is the balance that we try to strike, and that of course we have personal opinions about things. The only question is, can we be fair? So I like to think on my Saturday show, Newsmaker Saturday, that anyone who comes on there, Republican or Democrat, will feel that they got a fair hearing. That's my only job. I'm not supposed to put them in a box, knock them down. You can question them, you can probe, you can thrust and parry, but my job is not to try to discredit them or, unless they're completely in space. And even I had alien people on who believe in aliens, and I gave them a fair hearing because that's my job. I don't know. I have no idea whether they're aliens or not. I don't know. So it was a great show, actually. But the point is, you have to suspend that and try to have an open mind and an open heart about who you're interviewing. I think that's in the end, that's a litmus test.
Yeah, I miss people like Tim Russert, who just did their homework so thoroughly. And if you've been and frankly, another one I would put on in the same category is Nina Totenberg. Anytime I've ever been interviewed by Nina, our politics could not probably be more different, but I always felt I got a fair hearing, and that she was incredibly well prepared and fair. And fair.
That's great. That's to me where the rubber meets the road.
Well, I think at the end of the day, as a journalist, if you want to be a good journalist, you have to put your opinion aside, and you're not doing a service to the community having a hidden agenda. You have to go to these debates, you have to go to these politicians and ask the hard questions, because none of them are clean. And we need to know what are their plans and how are they going to implement it. Yeah, some of them, I'm not going to mention names, say lies on air, but then it's our due diligence as reporters, as journalists, we're not attacking them. We just have to say that what this person just said is not true. And our community should know which are the journalists or which are the stations that are providing them that information.
I wanted to follow up on that, just in tonality of how reporters do what they do. I watch, frankly, with a degree of disgust at what has gone on in the White House press corps. It has devolved into such an acrimonious place. And I don't like the lack of civility, the lack of manners. We've got a tough job to do, but there's also a way to do it respectfully, and I don't like the tone that has been taken. And I've never found in my job that it's ever worked very well to be accusatory with somebody unless they really deserve it. You need to ask a question and let them answer it. And I feel that art has really been lost. This has become a battle. It's become a show in the White House press room. And I've been there twice, and Obama was a very different environment. President Trump, when you're with the press of President Trump, there is a contempt that they have for this guy, almost universally. And I always think, this doesn't reflect well on either side. They're battling, they're fighting back, they're hitting, they're counterpunching, and the media's doing the same. And I'm not sure the public's well served by some of this stuff.
I definitely agree, and I think that if that is the view, then you're going to find that the president, any president who would be in that situation, is not going to make himself or herself available to the media very often, and we're seeing that. And it's so important, I think, for the press. The press is and the framers of the Constitution recognize this, that the press is one of our principal bulwarks for our freedom, because they are holding the government accountable, as well they should. But if you don't have that professional setting where the reporters are in a professional manner, respecting the dignity of the office, holding the president to account, then we're all really losing. If there is one side versus the other side, people are going to lose confidence in that.
Let me start with, as we kind of start to wrap this. Valeria, do you believe that the consumer of news now has never been more empowered, because there are so many outlets, so many places for information, that if they are very studious and diligent, they can navigate through all of this and find truth?
Yes. I mean, there's so much technology, there are so many media outlets, there's so many ways to find out what the truth is, especially when it comes to the government. Obviously, some of them say their opinions, and that's going to what you were talking. We are living unprecedented times, at least in my lifetime, where we have an administration that has been attacking the press since they launched their campaign. Yes, has it changed drastically how the White House press corps is being portrayed, how they are acting? Yes, it's different than what we saw during the Obama era. But I understand that it gets to a point as to how much can I handle of being disrespected and not answering back, though there are ways to answer back respectfully. You have to be the bigger person. I think it comes down to who's going to be the bigger person. And it is tough having to cover a moment where you are giving the microphone to the elected officials, but then you have to explain what they said it wasn't true, because it wasn't, they're just not saying what are facts. And that happened to us recently. The president announced on network that he was going to sign an executive order giving immigration reform to give a pathway to citizenship to dreamers. A president does not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, a president does not have the power to sign an executive order to give a pathway to citizenship to immigrants, and not all other presidents would have done that already. He can present an initiative, and that initiative can go to the Congress, and then Congress can create a bill, and then it could pass the Senate and the House, and then get to him and sign it. But it doesn't work how he said it, so then what do we have to do? We have to go and explain it on air, so our community doesn't get confused. And there was still confusion.
Sure.
So I want to know, what do you deal with when it comes to that? When you're explaining them that what he's promising can't happen, and then they're criticizing us, the press, even though we're giving them information based on lawyers, based on facts.
Yeah, and I think then that it's our job to kind of separate that out and explain the process. I guess I'm getting more into maybe tonality as well about which came first. Was the animus toward the press, or the press animus toward the president?
I think for as long as I've been alive, it's definitely both.
There's a tension.
But there's, going back to Nixon,
Yeah.
so many years ago, certainly there was animus toward the press.
Social media, can we hit on that just quickly? Has social media, do you believe, changed what we do?
Well, I think you'd be better to answer that than I.
I think it has. I think certainly Twitter, because it's so instant, that when news breaks, people are now, a lot of them are going right to Twitter because it's where you find it generally first.
Social media gives you a platform to say whatever you want, and it also gave outlets who say they are news to report whatever they want without being fact-checked. We're constantly being fact-checked. If we say something wrong here, we can get in a lot of trouble. We can lose our jobs if we say something incorrect on air. However, there's other outlets who just online publish whatever they want. And that's how a lot of people are spreading the incorrect information. I don't even like saying fake news, by the way. I think it's a huge insult. That's why I say misinformation. Definitely, there's a lot of benefits to social media. But sadly, us as the press, as journalists, are also seeing the negative side to it.
Well, and I'll give you a chilling example of this. We were briefed at the court on efforts by the Russians to undermine confidence in the judiciary. Getting back to what we were discussing with Chief Justice Roberts, through social media, by inflaming conservatives against Obama judges and liberals against Trump judges, by decisions that they would make and putting out what unfortunately are fake news pieces to propaganda. Exactly, to undermine confidence in that very, very important institution. And they really know what they're doing. But the number of people who spread these stories, because again, people are not necessarily seeking truth, they're seeking validation. And they find that validation and they repeat it. And so I actually think that as great as social media has been to communicate with each other, it also has been very damaging in the amount of disinformation on both sides.
I think it's been damaging also that it has unmasked journalists. A lot of opinion is coming out on social media from journalists, so you get a pretty good sense of where they're coming from, their view of the world. I do look at social media a little differently than a newscast. I think it is a place to have a further conversation. I look at it as if I were at a barbecue and I were talking to people at this barbecue and they were asking, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about COVID? It would be that conversation. It's not the conversation you would necessarily have on the newscast, but there's a danger in that. There's a big, big danger in that. Thanks for watching this talk, Arizona Talks, and you can go to arizonatalks.org for more information. And I want to thank Carlos again for having us, and Valeria and Clint Bolick for being part of this panel. And I'll see you on the news, and I'll see you on the high court. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, I'm Carlos Alfaro from Arizona Talks, and if you like conversations like these, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and at our website at arizonatalks.org.